Welcome to the Destination Gettysburg podcast.
Hello to everybody out there today. I'm here with Hal with Dawg on Bees. How you doing, Hal?
I'm doing very well.
You've been here for a good while. This is a family-owned, operated business. Late 1800s, am I right?
Yeah, great-grandpa Wesley, I believe in 1860 to 1870-ish, was a beekeeper, had an apiary. His grandson Floyd got into beekeeping as well, and I'm his grandson-in-law. So we're better part of what would that be, about 80 plus years in beekeeping as a family.
That's pretty amazing. It's glad now because now you have multiple locations.
Mm-hmm.
New Oxford, here in Gettysburg as
Right.
well. So you're flourishing.
Yeah, we also participate in some farmers markets and some special events as well, but our main focus now is the apiary and the meadery, and working out of our two stores, both in, again, New Oxford and here in Gettysburg.
And we talk a lot about honey, what goes into making it. It's a process. What would that process be like to in layman's terms, somebody just coming in from the outside saying, what goes into making honey?
Well, quite frankly, the bees pretty much take care of all that. I basically steal the honey from the bees and then use it to make the various products. But what goes into beekeeping with regard to what the bees do for us, each colony has about 90,000 bees in it, plus or minus at their peak. A bee will travel 3 miles, some people say 4, but I'm comfortable with saying 3 miles in radius, which would be a 6-mile diameter forage area. The bees themselves bring in, for each colony, about 5 to 10 gallons of honey annually. Some do more than 10 gallons. Each colony can do more than 10 gallons. The bees do all the work, obviously, and I'm just pulling off the excess honey from what the bees bring in. What's neat about what the bees actually bring into our apiary is based on seasonality. In the spring, we get a very light, delicate honey, very sweet. The kids really love that one. But quite frankly, in the fall, based on where the bees are located, we get a separation of color. Keep in mind, what blossoms in the spring does not blossom in the fall. So mostly what's blossoming in the spring is plants that are producing some kind of food, like apples, peaches, fruits. We call them vegetables, tomato, but they're actually fruits from the garden. Your melons and your berries, your strawberries, or blueberries, or black raspberries, or raspberries. Anything that actually has got an open stamen and pistil that is producing a fruit. There are a lot of weeds in the spring as well, but not as many weeds that are in the fall. So the light, delicate honey does come from the spring blossoms, and it's about the same no matter where my colonies are located. Now, in the fall of the year, where I have colonies that have more access to woods and streams, are picking up a much darker honey. We call it a wildflower ambrosia, which has a lot of Japanese knotweed influence, which gives it a richer, bolder flavor. And it doesn't taste as sweet on the tongue, and I think most adults enjoy that because having the boldness offsets the sweetness. Now, again, the darker honey comes from more of a woods and streams influence in that 3-mile radius forage area, whereas the lighter honey that we harvest in the fall comes from more open fields, where the bees may have more access to meadows and areas that that aren't really overpopulated with the Japanese knotweed. We actually harvest about 2 times to almost 3 times as much in the fall as we do spring, because quite frankly, the bees are building up in number through the spring months, so there's not as many bees foraging. But when we get into the fall, August and September, October, when all the goldenrod, well, of course, the Japanese knotweed comes in, but also ragweed and all the other weeds, because there's not a lot of blossoms in the fall that actually produce food. Mostly the fall honeys are actually weed honey. And with that said, the bees are up in maximum strength, and there's probably 70 to 90,000 bees in a colony, a lot more workforce, and they can bring in a lot more honey.
Now, on that note, you were saying earlier that you acknowledge that the bees do all of the work, and you take some of it from them, obviously. How much of it do you leave behind? Because obviously you don't want them to just be completely empty.
Oh, yeah. To get a colony to overwinter, you should leave about 160 to 180 pounds of honey on the colony. That's done. We want to try to obviously keep the bees well fed through the winter months, where they should cluster. Right now we're having a hard time maintaining the health of the bees through the winter. Winter losses are horrendous. And what I find is when my number of colonies that die out, they'll leave as much as 70 to 80 pounds of honey on the colony. That's equivalent to almost a 5-gallon bucket. That's a lot of honey that gets stacked up and racked up through the winter months. And I can extract that out of the comb, but a lot of it's crystallized. So what I do extract and able to utilize in the meadery, because we'll turn that specific honey into alcohol, we'll turn around and put back out the frames that still have sugared honey or candied honey on the bees, and they'll actually clean it up, reconstitute it into a liquid, and I can again harvest it later. So the bees will fix whatever I cannot get out of as far as the winter deadouts.
Gotcha. That crystallized honey you were talking about, that's an important marker for anybody who is buying honey, because I mean I was living a lie my whole life. Whenever I would go to the store and buy a bear of honey, and say, wow, this lasts forever. This lasts forever. And then one time I got a jar, and it was like maybe a couple months down the road. The expiration date was still good, but it came like crystallized. I'm like, oh, is this no good? And then I realized, no, that's a good marker when you get honey that has crystallization to it, because that tells you it's
real.
Yeah.
Well, that said, you got to keep in mind, I get an array of colors of honey that the actual bees bring in. Keeping in mind, I don't feed my bees anything. They're fed the frames of honey that are left over from the deadouts, so they're getting real honey reintroduced to the colony. There's no corn syrup, there's no sugar water, there's no additives. So mine is really a pure raw honey. The fact that the crystallization is such a key factor. When you go to a grocery store, every time I go to the grocery store, I look at honey sitting on the shelf, and I'll be darned, it never changes color. It's always the same color, and I guarantee you it's got to be half corn syrup or half sugar water, because there's absolutely no way any operation that's truly bringing in a real honey can constantly have the same color. It ain't going to happen. And the crystallization is very easy to fix. If you got smaller containers, you can take a bowl and run real hot water off your tap, and you can stick smaller containers in that hot water from your tap. And if it doesn't clear the crystallization the first time, dump out as it chills, refill it with hot water, put the honey jar back in, and it will fix itself. It will turn back into a liquid. And if you got larger containers, you can just get a saucepan, fill it up halfway on the stove, drop a jar in, take the lid off because you don't want to explode a bottle of honey on your stove.
Sure.
But take the lid off and let it simmer at a very low temperature for about 15, 20 minutes maybe.
Okay.
And stir it and make sure that all the crystals are gone, and it'll probably last for another 6-8 weeks before it'll recrystallize again. But honestly, honey has no expiration date.
Right.
There is no expiration date on a jar of honey. If it's true honey, it will not spoil. Period. Explanation point. They found honey in the Egyptian tombs that was 3,000 years old. And think about it, 3,000 years ago, they didn't have sealed containers. They used clay pots with lids that just sat on top. They probably had I don't know, I guess it'd be a big urn or a vase, that's probably held about 10 or 15 gallons. And they'd fill that up, and then they put the clay lid on it. And basically what happened is that turned into crystallized honey. It turned into somewhat of a solid. And of course, after 3,000 years, that lid wasn't sealed tightly.
Right.
So I'm sure there's a little bit of dust that sort of worked its way in and probably sat on top of that crystallized honey. And what they did, I'm sure, is just scrape off the first inch of honey with all the dust on it, took the rest of it, warmed it up, hot water bath, and lo and behold, it's still good. It doesn't spoil. So
Yeah, I've done the hot water bath trick myself, but I always I'll take a little bit of it because I actually like the crystallized honey sometimes because I'll spread it on some toast.
Yeah.
Just because it's more of a butter. I don't know if many people do that, but it's a nice little consistency for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, with the local honey and what doesn't go into it, like corn syrup and so forth, that produces a lot of great health benefits. Of course, this time of year we're having unprecedented, people with allergies and so forth. Myself, my whole family included. What are the benefits that you get to somebody who might not know of raw local honey?
We're sitting in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, major battle of the Civil War. And before penicillin was invented, I think that was just before World War I. The benefits of honey, it's very much an antiseptic. It was used to dress wounds of the wounded soldiers here on the battlefield. Hospitals and doctors used it as, they'd put it on wounds to help heal it. So there is tremendous antiseptic, antibiotic action that actually helps people with cuts and wounds. So put it on a cut and you'll be surprised. It may not be as good as triple antibiotic ointment,
right,
but in all sincerity, it did a wonderful job. And you think about all the horrendous wounds that those soldiers had. They actually used honey into World War I as dressing for bandages, even though they still had penicillin. So that is one excellent benefit of honey. But it is also true that with all the pollens that are out there, people have allergies to ragweed and you name it, all kinds of different tree allergies and whatnot, that in the spring and in the fall, once the pollen season hits, and quite frankly, we're in it right now, if you go out and rub your finger across your automobile, you're probably going to see a heck of a lot of pollen that's accumulating. And obviously, if you're allergic to certain pollens, keep in mind if you're allergic to cats and dogs, a honeybee isn't going to visit a cat and dog, so it's not going to help you with those kind of allergies. But if you're allergic to ragweed per se, the benefits of raw honey is the bees bring in that pollen and it comes out and it's expressed in the honey. It's floating around in there, and like taking allergy shots, you're going to be ingesting some of that honey, and it's going to help build your antigens for what pollens that are local that you're allergic to. And that's the reason why you want local honey. If you get honey from Texas, or if you get honey from California, they got different flowers there, different weeds, and it's probably not going to be any benefit to you at all. But local honey obviously is going to be bringing in the local pollens that you're allergic to. So it is a help. I mean, doctors recommend it, and believe it or not, my dog had some allergies, and the vets even recommended it for my dog to put a little bit of honey in their dog food to help them with their allergies. So, yeah, there's definitely some benefits there.
Well, I learned something there because I've always thought of the benefits by way of digesting, eating it, consuming it, but I wouldn't think dressing a wound, might be a good use of honey.
Well, most people don't, but again, if you look up the history and talk to some doctors and nurses, I'm sure they'll tell you, the history of honey with regard to its medical benefits is tremendous. It really is.
Moving along, another big aspect is meads.
Oh yeah.
And you do wonders with that topic.
Yeah, I'm fortunate, and I'm looking at my shelf now, and it's looking pretty bleak. We do quite a bit of mead sales. We capture 160 colonies, 120 pounds per colony. Somebody can do the math. We're just a few thousand pounds of honey. And that said, we turn a lot of it into alcohol. And mead is the oldest form of alcohol known to man before beer and wine were even thought of. Somebody was out gathering water to put into storage. When the annual drought came, they'd have a drinking water supply. 12 weeks later, when the drought came, they went back to drink it. It fermented naturally. First taste of alcohol known to man, historians peg it as early as 17,000 BC to 11,000 BC, various places on Earth. And from there is the start of our alcoholic experience down to 6,000 to 4,000 BC. They had about 10,000 years to play with it. And over time, they started adding fruits and spices to come up with variations of flavor. And between 6,000 and 4,000 BC is when we became an agronomy society, meaning that we learned how to plant and harvest grain and do it in enough volume where we could bake a bread and brew a beer in volume. So beer showed up between 6,000 and 4,000 BC. Also in that window, 6,000 to 4,000 BC, somebody else learned how to harvest refined sugars. Southern Europe, with the long growing seasons, plentiful fruit, said, hey, we don't need to keep these bees and get the crap stung out of us. Mm-hmm. Took honey out of the recipe, substituted sugar, and on that day, the true wine industry you enjoy today is born. Water, sugar, fruit. Prior to then, it was water, honey, or water, honey, and fruit. And the difference between mead and wine is fermented fruit, where they take the fruit, they add the sugar and the water, and they're fermenting the fruit. Mead itself is where we ferment the honey, and the fruit is added at the tail end of fermentation to give it the flavor. So we're not fermenting fruit, we're fermenting the honey, and the fruit comes in as an afterthought to give the specific flavors that we're looking for in the meads we produce.
And the meads that you make, there's a lot of different flavors I've tried. I think did I go through an official flight?
Well, I tell all the customers, first of all, if I'm here, now I'm not here that often, so right. If you catch me here, you're lucky. Mm-hmm. But when I'm here, I really enjoy, sampling the mead because I produce it. I make it myself, and I'm pretty proud of it. I'll ask people, hey, have you tried mead? Yeah, I've had mead before. I said, you enjoy it? Yeah, I like it. And I said, well, I'm going to spoil you. I make the best mead, I think, in Pennsylvania, if not in the United States. Well, that's an awful bold statement. They'll come up with some kind of response. And I said, yeah, I think I'm up for it. Mm-hmm. And we actually go through and sample, we can sample only 2 ounces total. Okay, right. So I can't do 2 ounces of every flavor. If I did, that's about 11, so that'd be 22 ounces of alcohol. You wouldn't walk out of here. So you get 2 ounces, which is just a little sip off of each flavor. And with that said, most of the people that try it fall in love with our mead. they're taken aback and surprised
Yes.
at how good our product really is. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have my own bees and we have our own honey. But the fact that I have the consistency of my bees staying here year round, they bring in the same nectar year after year after year. My inputs are consistent, and I don't have to be worrying about it if I was not a beekeeper and I was buying commodity. How do I guarantee that I'm getting the same honey to make the same recipe? Because when you try our honeys, where we have a spring honey and 2 fall honeys, I've got 3 different flavors, and I can guarantee it's not perfect because even the colors can vary, but the flavors, I try to pigeonhole. This is what this is what that is, and it's imperfect.
Yeah, when I tried them, I couldn't pick one that was my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
There was one at the end. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but you specifically held it till the end because it would mess up my palate.
Yeah, that's the black raspberry.
Okay,
the black raspberry has got a nice full body with a very good dry finish, and it'll make you pucker, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And honestly, with the black raspberry, there's so much you can do with that besides drink it. Hey, if you like a steak with mushrooms and onions, you can saute your mushrooms and onions with a little bit of that, black raspberry, and it'll add some excellent flavor. If you like salads, you can add it to your raspberry vinaigrette. And not that you're going to get soused on it, but we do have a strong following on the black raspberry. But what's interesting is the 3 true meads that we sell, which is nothing but honey and water. I've had people inquire, hey, where do you source your grapes from? And I said, there's no grapes in this. All you're drinking is honey and water. And it's surprising the responses we get from people when I tell them that. Because I have one that comes across very much like a white wine. And then I've got another that comes across like maybe a brandy or a whiskey without the burn. 11% alcohol by volume is 22 proof. You're drinking this very much like a wine because it is truly, in my opinion, the foundation of the wine industry.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful thing. I was never that familiar with it until I came here, truth be told. But yeah, it opened my eyes because I wasn't quite sure what I was expecting to taste. And it was subtle yet pronounced at the same time. It's a delight to try every now and then.
Well, there's another sidebar to this too, and that's mead itself is cold fermented. Back to the original 17,000 BC when somebody added water to honey to their water to make a sweet water, and then hung it up with all their other water vats. Our product's made the same way. We take cold water, we add the honey, except we pitch a champagne yeast in to get the fermentation up to about a 3.5. Once we get it to there, then the alcohol content of the mead is high enough to where any of the undesirable bacteria are pretty much killed because they can't handle the alcohol. And then the yeast will take it up to where we'll finish at about 11% alcohol by volume. And with that said, the yeast really does help us get there quicker. It only takes us 12 weeks to make this. And I think I can ratchet that down to 8 to 10 weeks if the temperatures are right.
Okay.
So this is not a long, hard process.
As we close this out, obviously want to let people know your website is doggonebees.com, and that's DAWG, gonebees.com. You have a couple of different locations. Could you tell folks where those are?
Well, our New Oxford facility is 15 Center Square, New Oxford, Pennsylvania. And in that facility, not only do we have all the meads and the honeys and the fruit spreads and the candles and the shirts and all of our other retail items, we also have the beekeeping supplies and equipment. So if you're a beekeeper in the Adams, York County area, then if you need some bee boxes, some frames, smokers, hive tools, protective gear, then you can go to the New Oxford facility and they should be able to help you. We also sell the bees. I drive south to bring up packaged bees, and then I also sell nukes. So if you're needing the bees themselves, I offer them up as well. And when time allows, I actually give beekeeping classes so that beekeepers that have colonies should get themselves geared up to where they can actually harvest a minimum of 5 gallons to 15 gallons of honey off of your colonies annually. And if you're not getting that, then you need to take one of my classes on management of how to do it. So many people get into this hobby and they find that they're buying bees, they're not getting any honey harvested, and their bees swarm. They're excited about the swarm because now they got another colony, but they're never really harvesting honey. And basically there's a lot of mismanagement there. So I help people with that. Also here in Gettysburg, we added a new facility. We just opened it up this last fall. And this is our first spring at 430 Baltimore Street in Gettysburg. And here we have a little sitting area where you can buy some flights of mead. You can obviously sample all the meads, but you can also sample all of our honeys, and there's fruit spreads, and there's honey mustard and creamed honey, which is actually crystallized honey that has the texture of a butter or a peanut butter. When your honey does crystallize, it's really gritty, grainy. It's still good, but it's really hard textures, real sandy texture on the tongue. It will melt in your mouth. But a creamed honey is a very nice spreadable honey that doesn't give you that texture. So
Picked up some of that the last time I was here, and somebody was telling me earlier that you can actually put it in coffee. So I'm going to try that sometime.
Oh yeah, you can melt it, or hot tea for that matter. If it's a hot drink,
yeah,
it'll mix in because obviously the heat from the drink will actually melt it and decrystallize it.
Well, thank you so much, Hal. We wish you the best, and we'll be keeping close tabs on whether it's your meads or just everything else in general.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Destination Gettysburg podcast, produced and hosted by Rick Kennis, with thanks to our special guest. No part of this material may be reproduced without written permission. Get inspired for your visit to Adams County, Pennsylvania at destinationgettysburg.com.